There's a Psalm Napoleon Hill studied in silence for years, not as a religious routine, not as poetry to admire, but as a coded blueprint. And inside it, he claimed he found something most people miss, a pattern behind financial multiplication. The kind that doesn't look like hustle, anxiety, or constant pressure. Maybe you've noticed something strange too. Some people prosper without rushing. They're not frantic. They're not begging life to work out. They move, they build, they take action, yes. But there's a calm in them that makes you wonder if effort and results are actually linked the way we were taught. It's almost like money finds them through unexpected doors with a frequency that seems to challenge normal logic. Hill saw that same calm in the wealthiest people he studied. Different industries, different backgrounds, different personalities, yet a shared, invisible principle. A mental posture so consistent, it looked like a law. He couldn't name it until he read Psalm 112 with the eyes of someone searching for rules, not comfort. The psalm says, "Blessed is the man who fears the Lord, who greatly delights in his commandments. His descendants will be mighty in the land. Wealth and riches will be in his house." Notice the promise. It doesn't just speak about survival. It speaks about multiplication, mighty descendants, wealth that remains, prosperity that lives in the house, not just visits once in a while. That isn't luck. That's structure, spiritual alignment turning into material reality. But here's what almost nobody catches. Most people read that psalm like a request. God, please bless me. Hill read it like an instruction. This is the identity of the one who multiplies, and identity always comes before results. When it says fears the Lord, it doesn't mean paralyzing fear. It means reverence with direction. A mind that recognizes a higher order and chooses to align with it. Hill would call it a definite purpose harmonized with universal principles. And when that happens, wealth stops being isolated effort and becomes the natural consequence of alignment. So, listen closely. If you still feel like you're chasing money, something inside is still misaligned, because Psalm 112 quietly reveals this. The one who multiplies doesn't chase. The one who multiplies positions themselves, and positioning starts with a silent, irreversible inner decision. If this touched something in you, comment, "I recognize this truth." And in a moment, you'll see why so many people work hard, but never multiply. The real diagnosis is this. Most people work to survive. But Psalm 112 is describing a completely different kind of mind, the mind that multiplies. And the difference isn't the hours you put in, it's the identity you operate from. When you wake up thinking, "How am I going to pay everything?" your mind enters defense mode. It starts hunting for exits, not entrances. It manages shortage, not growth. And Hill noticed something brutal in the people who stayed stuck. They often worked just as hard as the wealthy, sometimes harder, but they were powered by a constant sense of lack. And whatever you hold with emotion, your subconscious treats as instructions. That's why the psalm doesn't sound uncertain. It says, "Wealth and riches will be in his house." Not maybe, not someday if the universe feels generous. It speaks with certainty, future tense with present conviction, because it's describing someone who has already assumed the inner position before the outer evidence arrives. And this is where Hill's insight cuts deep. The invisible enemy is the survivor identity. When you see yourself as someone trying not to sink, every win becomes temporary relief, not multiplication. You earn, then panic spend. You earn, then lose it. You earn, then sabotage the momentum, because the survivor identity secretly believes expansion is dangerous. It fears losing control. It prefers the familiar ceiling over the unknown space of abundance. Psalm 112 describes the opposite mind. He will not fear bad news. His heart is steadfast, trusting. That's the multiplying mind. It doesn't emotionally collapse every time life shifts. It holds an internal state of provision even when the numbers haven't caught up yet. Hill would call that applied faith, not passive wishing, but an operating conviction that organizes thought, emotion, and action in one direction. So if you've been blaming your bank account, pause. This may not be a money issue, it may be an identity issue. And when identity changes, money stops being your master and becomes your tool. If this is clicking, comment. I feel this truth. And boom. And if you want more teachings like this, wealth, discipline, mindset, and spiritual alignment, subscribe to Wealth Rewired right now and turn on notifications, because the next part reveals the detail almost nobody sees. And it can change your relationship with money permanently. There's a moment when the mind stops begging and starts moving with authority, and that is exactly where financial multiplication turns on. Napoleon Hill didn't see Psalm 112 as comfort. He saw it as a pattern, a sequence, a code. And once you notice it, you can't unsee it. The psalm says something that seems simple, but it's radical. He lends generously and conducts his affairs with justice. Pay attention to the order. First, he lends. Then, he manages. That means the multiplying mind doesn't wait to feel safe before acting like overflow is real. It operates from excess before excess is visible. Not reckless giving, not fake positivity, but a posture that refuses to let fear become the decision maker. Hill had language for this, the principle of mental seed. But don't confuse it with performative charity or guilt-based giving. The psalm isn't describing someone trying to impress God. It's describing someone who understands that money is a current, not a trophy. And currents require movement. When you clutch everything with the energy of, "What if I lose it?" you interrupt circulation. But when you release with wisdom, you activate flow. Here's the metaphysical turn most people never learn. Multiplication doesn't begin with what you receive. It begins with what you allow yourself to circulate. Because when you give from an abundant state, you train your subconscious to identify as someone who has more than enough. And once the subconscious accepts an identity, it starts hunting for matching evidence, opportunities, ideas, connections, timing. Not because the world magically changes overnight, but because your perception stops filtering life through scarcity. The psalm continues with another line that's easy to overlook. He will never be shaken. That isn't just spiritual language. It's psychological stability. The multiplying mind doesn't panic when the rhythm fluctuates. It understands that flow has seasons, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, but it doesn't collapse into desperation. And desperation is the fastest way to destroy leverage. Hill noticed the wealthiest men he studied shared one rare trait. They did not act from urgency. Even in loss, they remained internally composed because they understood wealth is rebuildable. They didn't worship money. They mastered the mind that generates it, protects it, and multiplies it. So take 30 seconds right now, close your eyes just for a moment, and picture yourself as someone who already has more than enough. Don't force it. Just let the image exist. Feel what it would be like to manage from overflow instead of shortage. That tiny shift is not imaginary, it's identity rehearsal, and identity rehearsal becomes identity reality. If you're feeling this perspective form inside you, comment, "I'm beginning to understand." Because in the next step, you'll learn how to turn this awareness into a daily practice that produces real, measurable results without turning your life into anxiety. Now we reach the point where awareness has to become commitment, because Psalm 112 wasn't written to be admired, it was written to be lived. And Hill understood something most people avoid. Knowledge without application becomes mental decoration. So let's translate the psalm into practice. It says, "He will not fear bad news. His heart is firm, trusting." Sounds too spiritual. Then hear it in Hill's language. The multiplying mind doesn't emotionally react to every external shift. It holds a stable inner frequency, and a stable frequency attracts stable opportunities. Here's the daily ritual that turns that into a habit. Every morning, before you touch your phone, before you check your bank account, before you let the world inject chaos into your nervous system, you take 60 seconds, not a desperate prayer, not a fearful request, a positioning of identity. Say this internally or quietly out loud with presence. I manage with justice. I lend with wisdom and generosity. Wealth and prosperity live in my house. I do not fear bad news because my heart is steady. I multiply because this is my nature aligned with higher principles. Is it simple? Yes. And that's why it works. Hill taught that repetition with emotion is the language of the subconscious mind. The subconscious doesn't argue, it executes. When you repeat a statement like this consistently, your decisions begin to change without you forcing them. You start choosing differently. You stop agreeing to deals you once accepted out of fear. You stop tolerating financial chaos as normal. You begin to protect your attention, your habits, your standards, because your identity is upgrading. And the psalm reinforces the deeper law. He distributes freely. His righteousness endures. The wealthy who last don't accumulate just to feel powerful. They circulate with intelligence, and circulation creates expansion. Even small acts done with an abundance mindset train the nervous system to feel safe in growth, and a mind that feels safe in growth becomes magnetic to growth. But hear this clearly. This isn't blind giving. The psalm also says he conducts his affairs with justice. That means integrity, structure, discernment. Hill would call it strategic generosity, giving where it aligns with purpose, where value is honored, where your energy isn't being exploited. It's not becoming a victim, it's becoming a conduit. So for the next 7 days, test it, not as superstition, as training. Every morning, do the 60-second identity declaration. Then take one aligned action that proves you're serious. Organize a bill, send a proposal, learn one financial skill, create one new offer, apply for one opportunity. Faith and structure, frequency and execution. If you're willing to commit to this experiment, comment, I align with multiplication. Because next, you'll understand how this stops being a moment and becomes a legacy, the kind Psalm 112 points to when it speaks about powerful descendants. When the identity of multiplication settles in, something starts happening that looks like coincidence, but it isn't. Opportunities show up from strange angles. The right person calls at the right time. An idea you ignored for months suddenly becomes clear. Hill would say, that's not luck. That's a mind that has finally tuned itself to a different signal. Psalm 112 describes that signal with one sentence that carries more weight than most people realize. His descendants will be mighty in the land. That goes beyond money. That's legacy language. When you multiply from alignment, you don't build wealth that dies with you. You build structure that outlives you. And Hill noticed that the truly wealthy think in decades, not months. They plant trees they won't personally sit under because they understand real prosperity is generational by nature. Here's the quiet secret. Sustainable multiplication is never purely selfish. It always carries a larger purpose. The psalm repeats the pattern: generosity, justice, steadiness. That means this person's wealth isn't built on exploitation, it's built on value. And value has a strange power. It invites resources the way gravity pulls weight. When you deliver real value to the world returns real resources, not always instantly, but consistently. And maybe you're already feeling the shift. Less anxiety when you think about money, more clarity when you make decisions. More ideas arriving without you forcing them. Conversations that used to feel casual suddenly reveal doors. That isn't imagination, that's expanded perception. Scarcity makes you miss signals, alignment makes you notice them. Hill called it infinite intelligence, not as a mystical escape, but as the mind's ability to connect patterns, people, and timing once it stops being dominated by fear. When you align with higher principles, you stop fighting alone. You begin moving with a current that organizes circumstances in your favor, not because you're special, but because you stopped resisting the flow of abundance with a survival identity. So here's your 7-day observation challenge. For the next week, track small seeds, a message, a suggestion, a random idea at breakfast, an invite you'd normally ignore. Write them down, don't dismiss them, because multiplication often begins as something tiny that a trained mind recognizes and honors. The psalm ends with a powerful image. His horn will be lifted up in honor. That's not ego, that's quiet authority. When you multiply with integrity, you earn respect without demanding it, influence without forcing it. And influence is a resource. It attracts more opportunity because people trust what is stable. If you feel this opening inside you, comment, "I see the seeds." Because the next piece is where everything locks in, the point of no return, where multiplication stops being something you try to do and becomes who you are. There's a precise moment when you stop trying to prosper, and you simply start operating like someone who already does. Hill called it the point of no return, when the mind crosses a threshold and can't fully go back to its old state. And Psalm 112 maps that inner consolidation with unsettling accuracy. When it says he will never be shaken, it's not promising a life with no storms. It's describing an internal structure that remains steady even when the outside shakes. Hill observed this in the wealthy. They faced losses, delays, setbacks, but they refused to let external chaos dictate internal posture. They held the identity of multiplication, even when the numbers hadn't caught up yet. This is where everything changes. You wake up and you don't negotiate with scarcity thoughts anymore. They may show up, and they will, but you recognize them as old noise, not truth. You start choosing carefully who you talk to about money. You stop absorbing financial advice from people who live in constant complaint. You begin guarding your mind like a garden, because now you understand prosperity is an internal crop before it becomes an external harvest. The psalm gives an image for this phase, growth that is slow, rooted, and unstoppable. Like a tree that doesn't rise overnight, but once its roots take hold, it doesn't collapse when the weather changes. That's mature multiplication. Not dramatic, not chaotic, not dependent on hype. Quiet, consistent expansion. And your behavior starts to reflect it. You stop spending to impress. You stop buying what you don't need with money you don't have. You begin investing instead of consuming. You honor financial commitments without drama. You pay on time. You plan. You track. You build. Because you are now conducting your affairs with justice, structure, integrity, stewardship. Something else shifts too, something many people never heal. You stop feeling guilty about growing. You stop carrying the fear that wanting abundance makes you less spiritual, because you finally see the truth. Prosperity with integrity doesn't offend God, it honors the Creator. You were made to multiply, not to shrink. Wisdom isn't poverty. Wisdom is stewardship. Hill taught that when the mind accepts a new identity, the body follows. You wake up with more energy. You decide faster. You execute with less resistance. Not because you're forcing motivation, but because inner alignment removes friction. You stop dragging yourself toward a future you secretly doubt. You start building a future you internally recognize as yours. So here's a question you should sit with. What would you stop tolerating if you truly believed multiplication was your nature? What would you stop buying, stop fearing, stop delaying, stop negotiating? That's where your next level is hiding, inside your standards. If this consolidation is happening in you, comment, "I recognize who I'm becoming," because the next step is the final integration, spiritual alignment and material execution becoming one flow, where multiplication stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like inevitability. There's one mistake that keeps millions trapped between two worlds. On one side, spirituality that talks about faith. On the other, real life that demands action. And most people live in that tension, thinking they must choose, as if money and God exist in separate rooms. But Psalm 112 exposes something that should wake you up. It describes a person who reveres the Lord and at the same time conducts business with justice, faith and strategy, trust and stewardship, inner alignment and outer execution. Hill spent years trying to explain this in practical language, and the conclusion is simple. Faith without movement becomes wishful thinking, and movement without faith becomes exhausting effort. But when the two walk together, prosperity starts to flow with less resistance. You still work, but the work stops feeling like struggle and starts feeling like expression. That's the integration. You begin the day with identity, then you prove it with structure. You don't wait for a sign from the sky to do the basics. The sign was planted the moment you received a purpose. You declare your posture, then you send the proposal. You make the call. You negotiate the contract. You track your spending. You invest consistently. You build skills. You honor commitments. You stop spiritualizing procrastination and stop materializing fear. You become whole. And here's what Psalm 112 keeps repeating in different forms. Stability is not an accident. He will not fear bad news. He will never be shaken. This is the multiplying identity. Calm, steady, principled. Not because life is perfect, but because the inner foundation is real. Hill would tell you, the outer world eventually bends toward the inner conviction that's repeated with emotion and reinforced with action. So now, seal it. Not as performance, as a decision. Because the old identity only survives when you keep renegotiating it. You don't need a dramatic moment, you need a firm one. Say this with presence. My mind is aligned with multiplication. I manage with justice. I circulate with wisdom and generosity. Wealth and prosperity live in my house. I do not fear bad news because my heart is steady. I build legacy, not survival. I multiply because this is my nature, aligned with higher principles. Then breathe and choose one action today that matches those words. If you're sealing this identity right now, comment, "My mind is renewed." And if you want more teachings like this, wealth, discipline, mindset, and spiritual alignment, subscribe to Wealth Rewired, like this video, and turn on notifications. Your new cycle doesn't start when money arrives. It starts when you stop living like it won't.